What's up, everyone? It's your boy Paul. Welcome to the Portal Room. And as always, I got my co-host, Christian, helping steer the ship. What's up, my brother?
Hey Paul, great to see you, brother. Doing good. Just a bit sleepy today. I don't know what it is, but trying to kick back into gear. Glad to be here with you though, brother. How are you today?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm excited to have our good friend of the show, I should say amazing friend. We got another therapist after Craft Beard. This time, experiencer as well. Great story. Can't wait to get him on and get into it. So without further ado, we got Dr. Dan. What's up, Dr. Dan? How's it going, man?
I'm very well. It's good to see you both tonight.
Awesome, awesome. Great, great. Yeah, I'm glad you were able to make it tonight. I know you were having a little bit of a delay there, but we're all excited here to chat it up with you.
Great. I'm pleased to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Dan, let's do it. Let's get straight into it. Give us the backstory. This has been my go-to question. So give us the backstory and what brought you to the UFO community.
Yeah. I am from England originally, and I mention that because I grew up in a period of time that I think was probably quite of a busy UFO time, even though I was not into UFOs. So I was born in 77. So I was in the UK, a child of sort of a young child of the 80s and then the 90s. And some of the earliest memories I have are of nuclear war, believe it or not, Armageddon, because I mean, we would practice drills at school. I remember right around sort of 88 to 91 was one of the most sort of scariest times because I mean, at any point in time, missiles were going to be coming from Russia. We were close to East Germany. I guess we had missiles in West Germany, so it was just a very military hostile time. And I do remember hearing kind of UFO reports as a child, and didn't think of anything back then about it being related to, you know, um, nuclear war or nuclear weapons. But now I see absolutely a connection. But the first sort of UFO sighting that I had was I don't know exactly the year, it was about 89 or 90, and I was in English countryside. I grew up in this beautiful sort of house in this valley, and I was looking up at the sky and I saw this triangle. I thought it was the moon because it was quite high up, but it was this perfect triangle in the sky. I just put it down to, oh, must be me. I must be seeing something. As a kid, I just, I really thought I saw a triangle, but at that age, when something's far away, it's just a sighting. It's not an encounter.
Dan, what kind of
Um,
triangle? Like what color or like what shape? I mean, was it lights or was it like a black triangle or what was it?
Middle of the day, um, blue sky, white triangle. Yeah.
Wow, I've
So
never heard of
not that common. Yeah. I mean, it looked like the shade of the moon. And okay, so I'm 11, 12 years old, certainly tell a few people, and they say, oh, that's cool. What is a 12-year-old friend's going to say? And then I really had no experiences, no thoughts about it, of the phenomenon at all. I saw a few science fiction movies that I enjoyed. The X-Files was not something that was in England when I was there, but when I was in high school, I remember seeing a few episodes, and everyone was so into it. And I look back and like the two things I said that were never going to work out were the X-Files is never going to be a big show, and this whole internet thing. That's it's a phase. No one's going to be into that in the future. So don't use me to predict anything.
that. I
Um,
think
but
I think you
yeah,
might have been a little wrong on that one, right? Just
a
a
little
little
wrong
bit.
on both. Yeah. But really, my full introduction and experience happened in 2015. I before then I looked up to the stars. I thought space was beautiful, but I kind of thought it was just us. I didn't even think that there must be another civilization elsewhere. I didn't even think like that. We're born to be sort of egocentric and just assume that that it's just us in this world. But 2015, it was May. I'd have to look up the date, but I think around 12th, 13th. I've got it in all the photo metadata. But I was in New Hampshire, Vermont, right on the border. There's a town called White River Junction, and there was a hotel off the highway. It was called the Hilton Garden Inn, and I was out having a cigarette in the parking lot, and I looked up at the stars, and I saw the stars had just come out, and the first few stars come out, it sort of grabs your attention. And I saw one star, and then I saw another star, and I was like, well, that star's getting a little bigger. That's strange. Stars don't do that. And then it got even bigger, and over the next roughly 2-3 minutes, it came towards me, very close, and went away from me. And on other interviews, I've sort of used a par 3 and a par 5 distance as a way to describe distance. I don't play American football, but I guess that field is 100 yards. But at its closest, it was 150 yards away. And then it moved away back to the sort of 300 to 500 yard range, and then back towards me again, and then went away. So there's 4 sort of movements back and forth. It was a pulsating orb. I'm going to use that language. Pulsating in the sense that the outside, you can kind of, it was sort of a little flexible and buzzing, basically. That the sound that I describe, it's like being under power lines. It very much felt alive, however crazy that sounds. This wasn't a sighting. I call it an encounter because when something comes that close to you, it feels like it's engaging in some relationship. And I was afraid. I'd love to say I was in awe and inspired, but in that moment, fight or flight was kicking in. I mean, we have 3 responses to fear. There's fight, flight, and freeze. I will say initially I had a freeze response. When it moved away to the par 5 distance again, I felt a little better, and I realized, like, I've got to get this on camera. Didn't have my phone on me. These weren't the days of sort of, well, the smartphone, but you didn't carry your phone around all the time. My phone was in the hotel room. I raced up to my room, grabbed my phone, came back down, looked up, and I was like, where the hell is it? And relieved to see it in the sky, but further away. I'm not sure exactly how far it was, but the image will tell you how far it was. And I got off about 4 shots, and that was, kind of it. I wish I had taken video. I don't remember using my phone for video. And then I just got a message saying the battery are low on these headphones, so what's going to happen is they'll die, and then I'll just speak through the microphone here, just so you
That
know.
happens to me every time, Dan. You're good.
Okay. So after that, right away, I called my girlfriend, who's my wife now, and told her what happened. And she was very supportive. She was just astonished. Wow, what could she say other than, "Are you okay?" And I think she probably thought that it was some, I don't know. She didn't really state it, but I don't think she thought it was some phenomenon, something out of this universe. She probably thought it was some weather phenomenon, maybe. But I hadn't known it too long. I'd known it like 5 months. I wasn't going to share everything at that point. So I go up to my hotel room, and I am thinking a lot about it. I mean, I'm just like, did that happen? I mean, it's like hard not to question it, even though it absolutely did. And so I remember, really, all I remember is going to sleep and waking up 12 to 13 hours later. And the first thing that I remember feeling when I woke up was pain around my eyes. This real like sinus pressure type pain all around my eyes. I describe it as orbital sort of pain, right in the bone, like deep in the bone, right around here.
Ouch.
And that's just while I'm lying sleeping, and you wake up and your eyes are closed, and you think, God, how do you feel this morning? And that's what I felt, and I felt really fatigued. I open my eyes and I can't see anything, which was very scary. and I'd lost vision for several hours, and it came back pretty quickly with time is very hard to look back and say, when I'm giving you these time ranges, I really don't know, but I would definitely say at least 2 hours that I lost vision for. But when it came back, it took about 5 to 10 seconds. I know this part, 5 to 10 seconds to see fully and clearly again. So it wasn't just suddenly the lights are on. It was like a dimmer. The lights came back on. I then went to my primary care doctor, who was only about 3 miles away. I was thinking, okay, is this something serious? I mean, to wake up and not have vision. There goes my headphones. Let's see, can you hear me now? Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes, we got you, Dan.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
we
can't
got
hear you. Hold on. I cannot hear you. Let's see. I'll turn off Bluetooth. 1 second.
What happens with this stuff?
I got you now. Okay. So
There we
went to
go.
the primary care doctor, and told him, I didn't tell him what happened. So he's a physician in the Dartmouth Hitchcock community. We all know each other. So Dartmouth Hitchcock is a medical center. That's where they train med students. It's affiliated with Dartmouth College, where I was a graduate of the neuroscience program, and I was doing research and teaching in the Dartmouth College community. So I was very weary of sharing anything like this to someone in the community. But I just told him the symptoms. I said, these are my symptoms. What could it be? He basically put it down to being a cold or a flu. Now I've had a cold and a flu. I've had sinus pressure. We've all had that. We know what that's like. This felt different. There was an eerie component or feel to it, a sense of detachment, I'd say, almost derealization, to just the whole experience. And he said, take some cold and flu medicine, Tylenol, and you'll be fine. I did tell him about the sun blindness, is what I call it now, because I don't know really what else to call it. And he said, have you been in the sun? And I said, no, I haven't been in the sun. It was May in New Hampshire. And basically went on my way. There was nothing really he could do. And I don't know, looking back, maybe I should have got an MRI or done XYZ, but to be honest, I knew kind of that it was a symptom or a result of what I had seen. And it wasn't until a few weeks later that I started to worry, was there actual neurological impact from what I had seen? But anyway, I drove down to South Carolina from Vermont, and I was moving down to live where I currently live in South Carolina. And I kind of, part of me wanted to just forget about it and leave it behind. I was starting a kind of a new life. I was leaving my job. I had fallen in love, and I was just so excited to move on. And so I just put it behind me. And I also didn't want to come down with this big story. I knew some people down here, and I just didn't want to. I was deeply worried about reputation and stigma, and I was still a professional working in that community, even though I was relocating. So yeah, that's kind of the experience.
Yeah, that's really intense, Dan. I know that. So there's a lot of us that see orbs. You know what I mean? And I think it's your particular situation is a rare sort of case, even within what I would say like the UFOX community, because of the physiological effects that you've experienced, and to what degree you experienced them. Um, but also kind of like going in a slightly different direction of that. Like, you're a therapist, right?
Hmm.
As a therapist, how exactly did what you experienced kind of change? Did it change your worldview? How did it kind of change your idea of kind of what things are happening, especially in and around the UFO scene?
Yeah. I'll be honest, back then I didn't know there was a UFO scene. Um, I had heard about reports on the news here and there. I had a friend of the family that said he'd had a sighting, but I didn't know there was a UFO community, and I'm sure there was at that time. My first sort of introduction to it was seeing the New York Times article, and that sounds just like horribly cliche now because everyone sort of reverts back to that. But I didn't discover that article that year. It was really probably around end of 18, early 19, where I started seeing those videos. And I remember my business partner at the time came into our office, and she said, "Well, I guess UFOs are real." And she had just seen the video, and I had kind of, I think I even said in that public meeting at work, I said, yeah, I kind of knew they were. I've known for several years. And in that language, UFOs were real was obviously meaning that something from out of this world is visiting. And Yeah, so I didn't know there was a community until I started going on X, and I found a community. Really between 2019, 2000, well, up until this day, I've just come across some wonderful people that have had experiences. And it sort of reminds me actually of when I was younger, because I have a personal experience with anxiety disorders and had very bad anxiety when I was younger. And it was right around sort of 21, 22, where I discovered that other people had panic attacks and things that we can kind of talk with ease now, but that came with so much stigma 20 years ago. And to discover other people who have experienced things, it just came with huge relief. Like I'm not alone. I'm not going to be judged by everyone. And that I will someday, when I feel comfortable, be able to share my story.
So, I wanted to maybe ask a question that we asked Craft Beard, because you guys are kind of in the same arena, more or less. So, when it comes to patients and so forth, do you ever come across clients that have paranormal or UFO experiences? And if so, how do you help them therapeutically get through it?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say to you I've had that experience. Is it because I'm an anxiety specialist and maybe we see it less? I don't even
Ah,
think that's
gotcha.
the case. But yeah, I have not once in 20 years of doing counseling have had anyone come to me with a paranormal experience, with a UFO encounter. Um, Now I wish I'm like I would love to be able to empathize and normalize and emotionally connect with someone who has had an encounter, but that hasn't happened.
Um, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Kraft specializes more in trauma, right?
Yes,
So
he does.
that's probably the difference here. Okay. Well, that makes sense. All right, question out the door. But if you were to give advice, I guess hypothetically, what would you say, or how would you approach that?
Yeah. It's tricky because I could only imagine that a percentage of the reports that I might get might be based on a mental health condition. Because I tell you why, there are clients that I've met with. Maybe this is because of the age group that I work with, but between 18 and 24, typically males, as I work with more males, who will be experiencing what we call a manic break or a schizophrenic break, which is sort of the early stages of schizophrenia or their first manic episode. And in those situations, they're going to have auditory and visual hallucinations, which is basically hearing something that isn't there or seeing something that isn't there. Now, they're not, again, when they've come to me with those symptoms, um, they're not reporting that it's paranormal. They feel that it's real, but it's just different. So I would, as a clinician, have to be very aware of that and sensitive to what is a break from reality, what is a mental health issue, and what is not. It is my ethical duty. Um, but outside of that, I'm assuming that, if I've screened those things out, and how I would sort of do that without really thinking about it and preparing for this question, Um, Psychopathology is all about the frequency of symptoms, the impact of those symptoms. Does it interfere with your daily life? Are you able to function? Are you able to go to work, have friendships? That's really what defines normal and abnormal behavior or pathology with just symptom experiences, you know? Um, so if it was something that, you know, someone had had an encounter, they thought about it a lot, it wasn't reoccurring and creating hallucinations daily, let's say, it was just an isolated event, I would be very open to learning more and to believing them. Really, I mean, I've gotten a lot of crap on X, a lot of or engaged in a lot of dialogue with people who said, "Well, it's your duty as a mental health professional to challenge, you know, the person's beliefs and ground them in reality." But who is to say their reality is not reality? And you know, the most important thing as a clinician is to connect and make that person feel like they can trust you, and you can only do that if they feel you believe them. So that would be my absolutely first go-to is I am going to choose to believe you until there is clear evidence that I have to question it, you know, and you'd want me to question it.
Right,
That's all I can
absolutely.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that stance as well, Dan. You know, you and I have
Hmm.
talked a few times about that. I so I want to try to maybe get into let's get into a little bit more of like the woo territory, if you will, and about like your experience. I want to talk about your experience a little bit more because I feel like
Sure.
it's such an incredible experience. What do you feel like if you'd have to say, you know, from your best power, like your best power of deduction, what exactly it was that you were interacting with in that moment? Because I've seen the photograph. I'd love to, you know, maybe cut in the photograph afterwards,
Hmm.
Paul, if we can, of this to show it while we're talking about this. But
I'll
there
try to add
is,
it in here now.
yeah, there is a on the photograph. It looks like there's something underneath the orb that's actually coming towards you as you're taking a photograph. What would you say is like your best after coming through the UFO community and everything to the point you're at now? What do you think exactly it was that you were interacting with in that moment?
Yeah. Um, You know, I feel like our go-to response as maybe human beings is to assume that it's from another world. And I think the UFO community has opened my eyes and my mind to the prospect that it could be interdimensional. It could be future humans that are coming back. And no joke, I remember after I saw that triangle, and I'd never mentioned this, that I said to my dad, "What if UFOs were us from the future?" And he remembers that to this day, and he's 86.
Wow.
So that's, you know, certainly possible. But since then, I mean, if I had to kind of hedge, I would say, yeah, it's from another planet, because I guess it's hard for my mind to wrap my head around something else. Um, I mean, but also logically, like if you see the developments, and this is a, you know, a well used argument, but if you see the developments we've made in the last 50 years, it's so not unreasonable to say that, okay, in 500 years, of course, we're going to be able to go to another star system. It's just, you know, it just makes sense that we'd be able to do that. So I would say, there was some intent. I mean, that's what I felt like. I felt like the presence of that craft, it came with some intent. It wasn't ill intent. It was almost like it was showing me that it could just invade my space. And I want to preface this with saying this is my first experience. So your first experience like this is going to be a panic driven trauma based one or trauma influenced one. So it's you've got no frame of reference of how to analyze whether this is a real threat or a perceived threat. For me, it seemed like a real threat when it was close. Um, but it was engaging, it was communicating with me. Ever since, like I would definitely say, since I started talking about it, I feel like it is whatever it was, it's more friendly, that it really wasn't there to harm me. I mean, if it wanted to, it could have.
Right.
Now I was impacted by it, but that was my presence that was impacted by it. I could have ran, like when it was 150 yards away, I could have ran, but I chose not to. I mean, I say that, but I don't know if I chose not to. I was really frozen.
Right.
And no
Yeah,
one's
and that
asked me
seems
any specific questions, so this is all going to be pretty raw.
yeah,
Just
no,
so
no, no. And that's fine. Whatever you're not comfortable with, Dan, you don't have to answer, of course. Like this is, you know what I mean? We're kind of off the cuff here. Paul, did you want to say
yeah, I'm fine
something?
with that.
Yeah, I was sorry. Sorry for everybody watching. I pulled up some random overlays. I'm going to show the image right now just so we can have that reference.
Yeah, there we
So
go.
that's it
Perfect.
right there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so interesting because I don't know if you, as you guys can see, right, it looks like what we're seeing there in the center of the picture would even be interpreted as a craft to some. So as you can see underneath the photo, there looks to be like a small orb as well as another orb that sort of actually looks like it's extending towards you, Dan. You know what I mean? I think it's very interesting. You know, I think this is such an interesting thing when somebody has like such a very intense experience, how it kind of like almost sets them on a different path or trajectory in their lives almost, especially when you've had one that's so intense. Would you say that this experience in any way, shape, or form changed the trajectory of your life or, you know, and it like that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it did in the sense that 5 years before then, I was baptized in a church in the middle of Ohio, full immersion baptism. Grew up an atheist, and I was in grad school in northeastern Ohio, and I met this student Christian group at Kent State University, and they were all so nice and so like inviting, and they invited me to these sort of Bible studies, and I really got into it, and I felt some like Holy Spirit, as I called it back then. So I became a Christian, and after this event, I hate to say, it really did change that. And Christians would say it shouldn't need to, like both can coexist. But for me, it was kind of there was an ontological sort of shock component to it that yeah, I wasn't as much of a Christian believer, I'll say. Um, I mean, I will say that anytime I talk about it, I experience some of the same symptoms in many ways, not the orbital eye pain or blindness or anything, but my heart starts racing, like like I was there because, and I guess it's almost like a PTSD flashback. My startle response since has been just pretty jumpy. Like my wife has to kind of say my name when she's coming down the hall. She'll say, "Dan, I'm coming." She'll give me a little notice. Otherwise, I'll have a little jump. And I'd love to report like, all the opposite. Like I'd love to report that this is just was a spiritual awakening, and
Right.
and I have like psionic abilities, and no, but for me it was a traumatic kind of event, but did definitely open up my eyes. Now looking back, I feel like more reassured, like we're not alone. Like there's something wonderful about that it's not just us, and that there's something else interacting with us.
Yeah, it's a double-sided coin, I think, you know, because you have like the physical kind of effects that you had from the sighting or interaction, and then it kind of like, you know, opened up your mind to you know, the possibility, the fact that yeah, maybe we are not alone, you know, in the universe. I think that I find that a bit more comforting to myself personally than say that there's all
Yeah.
this space and we're the only ones in it. You know, but that's you know, I get the same kind of reaction when I go back to a few of my experiences as well. My heart rate picks up, you know what I mean? And it does, like it for some reason it, you know, and there might be a little bit of the science behind it. They talk about, you know, how it's like that trauma response that kind of kicks on the experiencer brain too. So I think that, you know, it's very interesting, all of this stuff, and I think science really has a lot to catch up on as
Mm.
far as it's concerned. You know, I think well, I'll let Paul go here because I'm still formulating a little bit of a question there as far as this is concerned because I could talk about your experience all day long. So I'll let Paul go.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, just because you mentioned it briefly, what's your position on the whole psionic asset uh, thing that's been going around and whatnot? Like, how much credence do you put into that in terms of not summoning UFOs, right? But there being actual assets to bring down craft to reverse engineer, right? Like, I'm not talking about the CE5 aspect, but in terms of like these retrievals and this being a part of the program, it's pretty, I mean, it's the hot topic of the past month or two. So what's kind of your position on it? Do you give any credence to the crash retrieval aspect, or more leaning towards like the CE5 aspect of it? What's your position on it?
Yeah. I mean, my general position is I believe people when they say something. I mean, that's, you know, and I'll see some skeptics that are just like, that's their mission, to be skeptical, and they'll see a picture and they'll immediately have to debunk it. It's almost like this
True.
psychological need to just, identify and justify, because they're not going to be able to feel regulated for the rest of the day unless they say that that is a bird or whatever. But sidetrack. But no, I generally choose to believe. I mean, I believe that psychic powers exist. I'm going to be one of 100 therapists in the world that will say what I'm going to say, but I believe that psychic powers exist. I believe that I do believe that probably CE5 is a, or at least people with intent and meditation, or who are good at meditating, can elicit or invite the phenomenon in some way. I'd be surprised if that's not the case. I mean, one person meditating, I'm sure that makes difference. You get a collective group that's harnessing that emotional energy to do that. I believe that to be the case. Whether that it's been a part of the program though, and they've been bringing ships down to reverse engineer. I don't know. It does seem far fetched, but I don't want to be closed minded at all. I mean, when I listen to Jake Barber, he sounds very sincere, and I feel like I can relate to him emotionally. He's an emotional person, as I am, for better or worse, and I think he might be making some speculations, but yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to see what you guys think. I can't. None of us really know, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, so when you were saying that you believe that resonance as a collective group, right? I think there is something to that in terms of the contact modalities, and you just look at history, right? All like the Eleusinian mysteries and all these other rituals that they did. It seems like people have been doing that for a long time. So I would say that's probably more real, but is it aliens? I don't know. Probably, I don't, I lean more towards the fact that it's probably some weird interdimensional spiritual thing. But I liked your little tidbit about Jake Barber maybe making some assumptions on certain aspects of the program. That's kind of where I'm at too. Like, I don't know if they're actually using psionic assets to bring down craft. Like, I more, it's funny, even though some of my own personal experiences seem or feel spiritual to me, or maybe paranormal, I'm still of the idea that the nuts and bolts and creatures inside of them exist, and that I don't see the connection yet. So I feel like maybe there's a certain narrative that's being put in place. If it is real, it's one that they're only trying to emphasize on and kind of put the box with all the tech away so that people just believe that this is only this interdimensional technology or something, instead of kind of admitting that there's real beings, real craft, and that we've reverse engineered that technology and they don't want to put that technology out, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind
Yeah,
of my take on it.
yeah. No, I mean, I could see that. It's like, if they've really reverse engineered, some craft, I just can't imagine that they've been able to keep it secret for so long. I mean, maybe it's possible. I just I don't know what I want to believe in that situation. Like, I do know that the government has secrets and is aware that this phenomenon is real, and likely has some craft. Whether they've been able to reverse engineer them or not, I'm not sure. But I know that they have secrets that they will never reveal, that they will do whatever they need to do to keep those secret, because, as I've said it before, they're not going to acknowledge any entity more powerful than themselves. I'm not holding out for any sort of public disclosure. I think it's our own personal journey, and
Yep.
what do we need to see for it to be sufficient data for us that it's real? I've had sufficient data since 2015. I don't need anything else. I get excited when I get a video that, like, wow, do you know why I get so excited? Because I so want to convince other people that haven't had my experience. That's my joy and like excitement. Is like, watch this, look, it almost validates my own 2015 experience and legitimizes it if I can prove it with someone else's.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I think we see that a lot in the community as well, especially for people who are coming in. They're just like, "Oh my God, have you seen this? Like, look at this. Like,
Mhm.
look." It's like, absolutely, yeah. Like, you're amongst friends. Like, we get it. Like, we understand. We see, I see this stuff on a nightly basis. It's a nightly thing for me.
That's
You know what I
amazing.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's intense, and we're not far away from one another. So, what do you
Yeah,
call it?
and I was so impressed that you have an app to see, okay, which are stars, which are satellites and planes. I think a lot of people outside of the community will think that we're not considering those things, that any
Right.
light must be the phenomenon.
Yeah, they do, and rightfully so. It's like you're talking about, Dan. You know what I mean? Like I feel like a lot of people are constantly distracted with the day-to-day life. You know what I mean? And they're constantly distracted looking at their phones nowadays. They're
Mhm.
kind of designed for that, so they're not actually paying attention to what's going on around them. You know what I
Right.
mean? And anytime you get somebody that comes into the community and is like, like, I don't believe this stuff, and it's like, well, have you looked up lately? You know what I mean? Have you
Yeah.
actually gone outside and, are you just busy looking at videos online and saying, no, that's not real? Um, yeah, it's very important, right? You know what I mean? If you're going to come out publicly, I think about, these sightings that you have, to make sure that you do have flight tracker, that you are using the Sky Tracker app for satellites, as well as like Leo Labs for low Earth orbit satellites. All those things, you have to do that.
Yeah.
So that way you're not psyching your own self out. It's important. You know what I mean? I really do feel that. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
That's kind of, I was just gonna say, that's kind of the flip side to people being stuck on their phone. When you talk about seeing stuff, there is a lot of stuff up there. So I just want to bring in that opposed perspective where there's also a mix of people that are seeing conventional things up there, and then they are getting convinced that they are UFOs because, again, people are so immersed in their phones now. So I think that that's also another thing that we have to be critical about too. And when it comes to the UFO community and people sharing videos and things of that nature, because having a collective amount of people who are seeing explainable phenomena versus people actually experiencing it, there's very recognizable differences. And I think for the people on the outside, when they see the two camps, they blend them in together. And I don't know, I think that stigma is still there. And the reason why I brought it up is just because I wanted to just have that other perspective acknowledged, where yes, people aren't looking up, they're not grounding themselves, but the people that now, at least like these younger generations, you can say like millennial and younger, when they look up and they see all these satellites, they have a total misconception because they're not informed on what's up there. So I think that that's a good argument to have in terms of how we can discern which experiences are real and which aren't. So yeah, having those tools is useful.
I'm just I'm still here. I just gotta get rid of this text. I apologize.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay. Yeah, and on that note, and this is something I've been thinking about a little. You know, we see something and we get really excited, and people are quick to judge and quick to say, what it is. And I think really the art of communicating in this space is, how do you share when you kind of know what it is? Like, and I haven't figured this out. And actually, there's some correspondence with Christian and I where I thought something was kind of cool and anomalous, perhaps, and he was like, "No, I think it might be this. You might want to look into this." Like, he had a way of doing it really sensitively, versus, dude, douchebag, it's not that. Not that he would ever say that, but there are people that would, and
True.
yeah. So there's sort of an art that I'd like to develop, because I don't want to take away that interest, and that faith and belief, and that self-acceptance that you're going to be wrong majority of times, and that's okay.
Right, exactly. That's important. I think it's important to recognize that, well, I mean, that we never want to be wrong about something. It's just kind of
Yeah.
how we are as a species, I guess. And but there's something to be said about extending people grace and patience and kindness. You know what I mean? It's not easy to do, and I don't think it's easy to do in this community because you have a lot of people who were believers and then they were lied to about certain things, and that it kind of jades an individual's opinion about all sightings, or the topic in general. And I think it's unfortunate, right? Because it's like especially with, we'll call it ufology or whatever you want to call it, is that there's been all these programs to kind of stifle the truth for such a long time, but in the meantime, there's actual real damage that's done to people's you know them, like their emotional selves, because they really, like, they want to believe that there's magic in the world. There's more to the story than just the base level that we've kind of been shown and educated on for such a long time. And that really can do a number on people, because you get people that come in, like, I see a lot of comments on people's videos a lot of the time, and majority of the time choose not to engage. But when I do engage, I usually try to remind the person who is posting the video that it's other people who are there to try to debunk their video are usually just in a state of either denial or ontological shock, right? Is what I call it. Like I keep saying it's like an immune system response from the consciousness itself to kind of reject this as something, as well as they're just want or need to, like you were saying, make sure it isn't real because they don't want to have to fit that into their worldview. But it's such a hard thing. You're right. It's a tightrope walk. You know what I mean? Especially too when you have somebody who's very, very intensely into the subject, who's fresh into it.
Yeah.
I mean, you have people who also have what they would say are like psychic experiences as well, communications, all sorts of. There's like a myriad of things. And I think it was good that we had Kraft on here, and I think it's good that you're on here now too, is because, you know, science needs to catch up, right? Science has to catch up with this because there are people who are suffering, especially in the experiencer community, who feel like they can't talk about this stuff with medical professionals because they're afraid they're going to be locked up or they're going to be reported. And I think it's good to hear from people who are in the medical sphere, especially with mental health, to say, hey, look, we're not going to lock you up. You can talk about this kind of thing. Maybe we can get to the bottom of it together, right? I'd be wondering, Dan, like, where do you see the science going, kind of in your field, to help maybe integrate experiencers in to this conversation a bit more?
Yeah, I've often thought about how I can kind of gently bring it into my field without imposing it at all, and moving away from ethics and best practice. And I think the only way I possibly could is obviously being open and empathetic to people who are experiencing or who have experienced something out of the norm. I think spirituality is a sort of a safe, maybe framework to communicate about it. That you know it's safe to talk about faith and belief and spirituality and meditation and so maybe that could be an avenue. But I almost think like medical science might even need to catch up first before mental health, because mental health is so linked to psychopathology and things that are real. I mean, schizophrenia is a very real condition that, you are going to see things that aren't there. And I just hope that, that doesn't, I don't know, perpetually like screw up me and my colleagues' ability to engage in the topic and with the community. Um, it hasn't so far. I mean, you asked earlier, like how many clients have come to me reporting an encounter or a sighting, and I said zero. I think it's zero because no one felt comfortable to, or they didn't know that they could, or they were worried about maybe being locked up or being called crazy or something. So why I'm so anxious to get that opportunity is so that I can show them that I'm not going to communicate like that. Um, so, what did I'm curious, what did Crawford say in response to that question?
He talked about several different patients that he's had where there was and he said it was, I mean, so let me just, I guess, kind of summarize one of the stories at least. Um, that basically he was in a session with someone, and he was talking about how there's this guy who had a second personality, and that it was like he was able to see himself outer body, like astral, like in an astral state.
Hmm.
And basically he was like, well, let's test that. And he said he made sure to be careful and get behind the guy and write down a number. And he asked him what that number was, and he said 42. And then Kraft said that he got the chills and he freaked out a little bit. And the guy was like, what was it? And when you showed him the number, he was like, see for yourself. And they both had like this crazy reaction together, like, wow, like how is that possible? And then he also mentioned treating inmates at the jail who had seen shadow people, and even guards and so forth. So he's in the camp that a lot of this is real. Maybe some of it's combined with some of the psychology or whatever the spectrum, whatever terminology you want to use. But what it is, he leaves open, and I like that perspective. So that's kind of what his
Yeah.
position was on, and some of the experiences he's dealt with when dealing with some of the clients who experience paranormal stuff. He said this though too, that he had never had anybody who talked about UFOs either, just like maybe orbs, but they mainly associated it to paranormal or ghosts and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's almost more socially acceptable to talk about ghosts, or if you believe in ghosts, than it is
Right.
UFOs. Um, yeah, I mean, I've had certainly clients talk about that. I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't be including that in the phenomenon. Of course, it is most likely. But yeah, I've had lots of clients talk about ghosts, and we're not jumping to psychopathology in those situations. So why should we with UFOs?
Well, how do you approach that? That's a great little thing to get into. Like, I mean, you don't have to divulge any personal client
No.
information, but how do you deal with those situations? And maybe if you can give us a little description on at least one example of somebody's experience. That'd
Yeah,
be
gosh,
cool.
I'd have to. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I remember this. I wonder if sharing it. I don't. Just thinking if sharing it would give any identifiers, but um, probably would actually, because for it to be a powerful story to share, it would give some identifiers, not names, but just places and situations, and if they were watching
No
it, they
worries.
would feel uncomfortable. But how did I approach it though? With interest, um, not thinking they're crazy. Um, and maybe the one difference is that it's well, I was saying it's isolated, but it wasn't, because they would have this experience repeatedly. So this is a very cool experience when you get this in life, where you realize, like, just like, wow, I could have this conversation and don't have to worry about linking it or not linking it to psychopathology. I think it's the stigma of UFOs. And but anyway, this person had an experience several times a week. It was, I can say, it was in a barn next to their house, and they would look out of the window and they would see a person, a figure, without legs, without, yeah, that wasn't like a full form figure, but very clearly defined person that would look up. First few encounters, it was terrifying, and then after that, it was not terrifying. And I, yeah, I didn't think that, I wasn't concerned about it. I mean, their life was stable and happy. It wasn't impacting their life. I was fascinated. I just asked a lot of questions, because this person was, well, you say this, wouldn't make something up, or why would they? They seem very grounded, and they were a med student, and yeah, they were in medical school. Um, so yeah, I think we should need to be really open whether it's related to ghosts or UFOs. So really, as a therapist, I will say it's like down to the frequency of those sightings, the impact of them, um, and then also maybe like how out there is it? I hope that's fair to say. Like how woo or crazy is it? Like, I'm not going to say crazy, but how out there is it? Like, are they feeling like, are they saying they're being transported to a different sort of universe every night? You may need to challenge me on that. Like, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's understandable. You know what I mean? And I appreciated Kraft's take on it as well, that like as a therapist, it's not really his place to, kind of debunk someone's experience either. It's his place as
Mhm.
a therapist to, give the tools to the individual to help them better function in life, to deal with the experiences. So that kind of leads me into my next question, and I'm going to get into the abduction phenomena a little bit. Uh, so there's a lot of community members that have experienced this abduction phenomena. And I think, because we talk about science kind of like catching up a little bit, I think I'd be interested to know, Dan, if you would be interested to taking on clients who have experienced like the abduction phenomena yourself, like as a professional, to maybe help some of these individuals as well, like to actually have some clients that could benefit from, the therapy that you do provide. Would that be something you'd be open to as a professional?
Um, Possibly. I mean, the decision to work with certain clients is based on, my experience, my personal experience. Like, why I'm an anxiety specialist is because it's my life experience. I've done a lot of research, been teaching about anxiety disorders. I've kind of lived it, so I feel like I can have a huge impact on people who are struggling with it. I don't know if I have enough experience to do that. That could be my automatic kind of fear-based response or insecurity, right? One can always just be present for someone and hear a story, hear an experience in a non-judgmental way, help them integrate that experience with their daily life. Yeah, I think I could do that. I would be open to that. I wouldn't want to become known or defined by that, because what pays the bills and gives me great joy is working with anxiety disorders that are stopping people leave their house and go to work and go to school. That's just kind of like my wheelhouse that I love and never want to give up. But that being said, would I have a small group? Like 5 years ago, I decided to do some pro bono work, helping the elderly. Like, there was no mental health services and for 70 and above, and we call it geriatric psychology, but older folks weren't going to see therapists and they didn't feel comfortable in a really formal setting. So I would go over to a retirement community or go to their home and have a cup of tea and almost like in a friendly coaching way. And I love that. And I was going out, I was going out of my comfort zone, and I could see it sort of like that. It's sort of like an externship kind of trial to see if I could integrate that into my worldview.
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Because there's just I feel like there's not a lot of resources, in the professional field. So I wanted to pick your brain on that a little bit, because I know there's a lot of community members that I feel like could benefit from,
Hmm.
therapy, especially around anxiety, because there's a lot of anxiety, I think, that comes along, even yourself with your own experience,
Yep.
know that there's some anxiety that comes along with it. So I just wanted to ask, right, for anybody that does watch, if
Sure.
they do see it and feel like, Dan would be a resource for them, you know what I mean? If you would be comfortable with him reaching out to you.
Yeah, how I would probably frame it is not coming to see me as a therapist, but coming to see me as maybe an informed coach, sort of a way to sort of not make it as formal, like if I'll provide some consultation. I've done this in, let's say, substance abuse. That's not my area of specialty, but there are some clients that cannot find someone to help them. They can't find someone to do an intervention, and I do interventions for anxiety disorders. I'll say, I'm going to do this for no cost. Please know that this is not my area of expertise. Please know I'm not serving you as a licensed provider, but I'm going to be here for you as a empathetic, strategic guide support for you. And if we need to bring someone else in to help, we can do that. That would make me feel a little more protected from liability and other things like that. So yes, the answer is yes to that.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, I think that the more we're able to, like, as a community, kind of build a network, you know what I mean? Because this is, I feel like, a lot of this is probably known by the United States government, but, that's where we get into the obfuscation for so many years about this. But I feel like it is a ground roots sort of effort for people who have had these experiences, right? You know what I mean? To sort of try to build these networks from the ground up. So there is some sort of resources, because, obviously the government hasn't acknowledged it. So we're kind of out in the open here, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I wanted to get I wanted to maybe get your perspective on something too that was mentioned in Kraft's episode, because I think it has a lot to do with the psychological aspect of this and the abduction phenomena. So how do you feel about some of the regression stuff, like the hypnotic regression? Because the way we were kind of going about it is that there is an influence on the collective consciousness where the trauma that we experience as humans becomes a metaphor through these manifestations, whether they're real or not, and that sometimes people are guided to believe a certain thing when they are going through a hypnotic regression.
Mhm.
So what's your position on that?
Yeah. So I am a trained hypnotherapist. I didn't take the training all the way to become like a master hypnotherapist or hypnotist, but I did do a lot of training where I was providing hypnosis for clients struggling with anxiety, certain habits they wanted to overcome. But it was never ventured into the trauma regression work. And maybe Craftbeard has more experience doing this, but I was supervised by people that were deeply skeptical about regression, using hypnosis for regression. Now, the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, the acronym is ASH, ASCH. They actually, I think, recently do now believe or have validated that it can be used to sort of bring about repressed or memories, and there is a sort of, I've got my book here, I could actually even look it up, but there's a section on regression. but I was always a little more skeptical about it because I did come across, I've had clients that have had really bad experiences with hypnosis and hypnotists that have used it as a method to control or embed trauma that didn't exist. It's very easy to do that. And then also, and this was a big thing in the 90s, during the sort of new age movement. Is that people would get hypnosis and they'd come away after 4 or 5 sessions and, I think, God, I think I was sexually assaulted by my parents, or and and majority of the time it wasn't the case. It was, because what can happen with hypnosis is that you can remember a dream that you had that you wouldn't remember, but through that deep meditative state that I've helped bring you to, you're remembering a dream you had 4 nights ago or even 2 years ago. So that's why, yeah, one has to be just really careful with that. The type of hypnosis I do is really, it's called Ericksonian hypnosis. So it's very invitational. So instead of me saying like, oh, you see a beautiful beach that's going to, make you feel very relaxed as you go into a deeper state of hypnosis, I'll say, on your journey to a deeper state of hypnosis, you may see a beach or you may not. Depends on what's right for you right now. I actually hear a lighthouse. You might, if that ring of the bell helps you go down from a 9 to a 10 to a, so it's kind of like come to the cusp of a trance at your own pace, at your own time. And my words will be there if you want to hold on to them, but it's okay if you don't. So
Yeah, I love that you're on that same position though, in regards to a person being led a specific way, because I do also want to say I'm sure there's a lot of use in that as well when it comes to maybe like PTSD or something of
mhm.
that nature. But it's funny when you mention the same thing about the 90s and about how it was a common thing that started to happen. Kraft said the same thing about how there were certain parents getting prosecuted for sexual crimes that they didn't commit because these therapists were leading the children down a certain path.
Yeah, the satanic
Because,
panic.
yeah, yes, that's what he said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you look at some of the biggest cults, they use neurolinguistic programming, which is linked to hypnosis. They'll use hypnosis either deliberately or not, but usually, like a famous one, Nixium. Do you guys know Nixium? You should look it up. There's a documentary about it. It's called The Vow. It's on HBO. It's fascinating. It's like a 2-season, 8-part per season documentary about this sort of self-improvement group that started in the 90s that evolved to bring in some really well-known, famous, wealthy people. Had a great reputation. They actually showed that they could cure Tourette's syndrome with hypnosis, and sort of got some traction. They met with the Dalai Lama, and then 4 or 5 years ago, they came out as like a sex cult, and they basically got brought down by a few members that helped bring them down, and that's the story of the Vow. It's basically their rise and fall as a cult. But their co-founder is a therapist, used hypnosis and NLP to recruit, and their process to sort of bring people in and hook them was a thing called EMs. I think they what is it? It's not emotional processing. What did EM stand for? It's basically like we're going to talk about something traumatic and we're going to talk about it again and again until you find some kind of cognitive way to deal with it or you're desensitized to it. So part of that sounds fine, like identify your fear and face it. But the other part of it is like break them down to their lowest point. And then the other Church of Scientology, that was their method. The e-meter, right? You're holding these things, they're sensing, I'm assuming, galvanic skin response and heart rate, blood pressure, and things like that, or just the response is going to be based on some of those readings. And we're going to talk about that trauma until you can control that dial, which is basically biofeedback. Now what they're doing is they're gathering all this information. You're repeating this over and over again, something traumatic. You're broken down, but then you feel kind of cathartic that you've let go of this traumatic thing and conquered it by being desensitized to it, which is the best part of exposure therapy. But then they kind of hook you because they've got all this information about you, which they used against a lot of people, saying, hey, you leave, we're going to make this public. Nixium did the same thing. So yeah, there's just I'm so against like group identity and what is therapy? It's about empowering the self and self-actualization and I'm very wary of groups, to be honest. They could be useful, but I don't know, even CE5, I could see that could sort of go into sort of cult and territory quite easily. They're seeing something magical. There's a guy that has put all this together. It's not difficult to see that guy could become a guru because he's a facilitator of this magic, and not to be overly negative and cynical about it, and I didn't think he's taking it there, but I don't know, maybe he is. I don't know enough about it.
Right, exactly. That's why I think it's always best to, well, I think it's best to use your judgment and your discernment to the best of your ability. You know what I mean? When it comes to any sort of contact modalities. And I would, and again, personally, I do not recommend doing this unless you have done tons of research and you're ready to step into the jungle because, bad things can happen. I mean, I think, Dan, your experience yourself, it's good to bring that to the table because there are physiological responses that do happen and occur with
Mhm.
experiences. I mean, there's a whole laundry list. So if anybody's watching that's thinking about it, do your research. I don't recommend just going out there and going for it.
Yep.
But I have a few more questions. I know we're getting close to closing up here. The question that I have is, have you had any more experiences since your initial experience, and have you been able to document any of it?
Yeah, it's been like kind of a disappointing thing. I've wanted to have more experiences. I hear when people have an encounter, they suddenly, or not suddenly, but they have more encounters after that. Maybe not the same, but they're more tapped in and attuned to the phenomenon. But that hasn't been the case for me. I have looked up at the sky a lot more than I used to. I looked it up. I think the average person looks up at the stars 5 minutes a month maximum. And I bet all three of us look up a lot more than that now. So in that, you spend that kind of time, you're going to see some things. And I have had, I would say 1, 2, 3 orb type sightings. I wouldn't say encounters. They're things that I see from afar that are not they're interacting with me, they're just present. Am I linking that to my encounter in 2015? I could, but I doesn't emotionally feel right for me to do that. I would just say, how are they linked? My perception, my insight, my awareness to the world around me has increased because of that encounter, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's we talk about this sometimes in spaces that, like I feel like once that wall comes down, once you see it, you know what I mean? It's almost hard not to see it,
Mhm.
for a lot of people. And then I think kind of my final question for you, Dan, would be this, because I know that you're very, you're into the disclosure, the government disclosure. From this moment right now, where do you see us in a year as far as disclosure is concerned, with the public?
Um, I can predict no more than anyone else. You'll see people make predictions. Unless it's based on real evidence, I don't think it's great to give predictions. I think it can kind of either scare people or, I mean, my opinion, we won't be anywhere else. We'll be in the same place, excuse me, in a year than today from a government standpoint. I don't think, yeah, we're going to be in the same place. There's no reason for them to release that information. They may release some information to, make us feel like, okay, there could be something there, but they want us almost in that land of unknown, indecision, they can control us, knowing just enough but not enough, and that's a landscape of control for them. So I think kind of the same place, unfortunately. I'm curious, what do you guys think?
I'm of the same mindset, to be honest. I think it's all breadcrumbs. As far as it's been, that's what it's looked like. Probably the most significant thing in the past 5 to 10 years would be David Grush, because there was a lot of, it was basically everything. Like, it was the crash retrievals, it was the bodies, it was the craft, black programs, all of the lore stuff. Now, whether or not he got duped, I mean, that's another conversation. I'm not going to even try to open up that can of worms. But yeah, I'm of the same mindset, Dr. Dan. I think that we're just going to keep getting breadcrumbs, and I think it's a way to control the population in a sense when you limit the output of technology, because I think a lot of this has to do with certain technologies that are in development, and also it's a way that you can control people who believe in certain ideologies, right? And a lot of people are starting to get into the UFO phenomena. And that's kind of why I was telling you earlier, Dan, that I'm very skeptical with the whole psionic asset aspect of the retrievals. So yeah, I'm of the same mindset. Christian, what about you?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you guys know from being in spaces with me for long enough. I always say it. I said, guys, the government's never going to give you the answers to this. It's going to come from the individuals, the experiencers like yourself, Dan. You know, you're going to tell your story. Another experiencer is going to hear it. It's going to open up their mind about something that they understand about the phenomena, and as a collective, I believe that's how we'll reach disclosure. Um, I think we're getting a lot of heavy doses in the public sphere of narrative, just like Paul says. Now, whatever the reason is for that, I think you're very close to the mark as far as being able to control people's um, like absolute perception of what the phenomena is, um, to try to keep people in a state of fear as well, and uncertainty. Also keeping people who, you know, believe in this phenomena that maybe are not experiencers, in a state of exhaustion all the time as well. Like there are a lot of telltale signs of, you know, of control as far as this is concerned. So you might get a version of disclosure. You're going to get a version of it. But I don't think it's going to be the actual disclosure that a lot of us would like to see. So yeah, I don't think we're going to get
What would
too
that
far.
version look like?
Well, you know, there's a lot of people that I've talked to that have been having experiences, right, about this, that have been saying that they think something's going to happen, you know, with the psionics, with all this, that uh, necessarily might not be like a good look for disclosure, right? There could be a fear narrative that comes into play with all of this. You know what I mean? I saw somebody comment the other day saying that disclosure won't happen a moment before there's an attack. And I would tend to agree that if there is going to be any form of disclosure, it will be in the form of an attack, which then will be able to, you know, co-opt a fear and a military response to these things. So I think that we have to be careful of that, right, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, to stay grounded as far as that's concerned as well, because I feel like there's a big chance of those things also happening if history is to serve as any example with governments and how they sort of start uh, long time wars, I'll say.
You know, it made me think about just mental health and the history of mental health and stigma is like when more people started talking about an experience, whether it was eating disorders or substance use or anxiety disorders, the stigma is it's controllable. If it's psychological, you can control it. Depression, cheer up. Anxiety, calm down. Snap out of it. That's the sort of the myth and the stigma of mental health. But the reality is that they are neurobehavioral conditions. They're neurologically based, just like other medical issues. They just happen to, many of them, be treated with behavioral strategies, and that's why they are sort of mental health issues. But the more people who came, out with those stories, the more people or universities and governments started to listen. Like, okay, there's some validity here. We've got enough of a data set or a sample, and there's advocacy groups that are gaining power. There's research. There's money coming from universities or grants, and we see some equivalent of that in the UFO community. So I think all that's heading in the right direction. But what I'm not seeing is, okay, there's a lot of judgment and questioning of, okay, is there any validity to C5? What about Jake Barber's testimony, David Grush? Like, we should be scientifically examining these experiences, the data. I mean, there should be a government sort of force of people that are out there interviewing people and collecting this critical data. I mean, subjective data is tremendously important, as well as objective data. Quantitative and qualitative data have equal value, and we need to be collecting both. So radar data is equally as valuable as my personal experience, and together, obviously, what we're looking for. But there's a reason why they're not. And if you think about religion, I mean, if you came to some of the Bible studies that I was in Ohio, and what we were talking about and believing in that we couldn't see, we couldn't prove, not just biblical stories, but emotional religious experiences we'd come into that meeting with, or that were shared in the church. And I mean, this is a lot more grounded than what we used to talk about in the church. So the fact that that's just fine and socially acceptable and the whole world's fine with that, but not this, that's really telling. Is that just more time needs to catch up? Science needs to catch up to make the phenomenon or ufology acceptable socially? Yeah, probably a part of that. Or is it an agenda? We're going to keep it in crazy land. But no, Christianity, that's okay. You can have those wacky beliefs. There's less evidence for that, but no, bring that on. Something isn't quite jiving here. And I don't think any of us in this community should feel bad or worried about believing in this, because it's a lot more tangible than a lot of other religions.
Completely agree.
And I just saw Screen's comment here a little while ago, and I think it ties in nicely with what you said. He put, now that I'm off of the occult mindset, I feel like it's a personal thing for those with eyes to see and ears to hear.
Love that.
Pretty great comment,
Yeah.
right?
Really good comment. Yeah. You can
with
be
that,
an independent, thinker that's rational,
right.
and a believer and a searcher.
Absolutely, Dan. I want to get some closing thoughts from you here. What advice would you give fellow experiencers and just the all-around UFO community to close it out? What would you give in terms of advice there?
I've been amazed with how many kind people there are in the X community, in the UFO Twitter community. Believe it or not, it gets a lot of crap, a lot of shit, but there have been some of the most warmest, inviting, accepting people that will listen to your story, listen to your experience without judgment, and steer clear of those that are not doing that. And you can block people, you can choose not to share on a space. And I mean, I'm not a good public speaker. This is not easy for me. But I think your space was the first that I went into. And you kind of knew how to just give me a little introduction, to speak a little. And I remember I was in the car in New York and driving, and I was like, I can't believe I'm talking to random strangers on a space. But it was so nice to feel connected and talk about something I'm so deeply interested in and passionate about, and I could do it safely. So find that community, find that space. Don't be afraid to share. There's a lot of people that care about you, want to hear your story, and not judging, not making assumptions. We want to be here for you. I want to be here for you. So please reach out.
I love it. That was perfect. Christian, you got any closing thoughts?
I just agree with, I agree with Dan there. You know what I mean? This is a this is a whole, like, we could argue that it's like since the beginning of recorded history that people have been kind of going and having these experiences with this phenomena. Um, don't be afraid to reach out to people to talk. You know what I mean? We talked about this before on actually on Eric Mitchell's channel. Is that as an experiencer, when you actually come into a group of people who've had other experiences, it's like taking a backpack off of your shoulder. You know what I mean? That you've been carrying around for a long time because you're like, oh my God, I can finally talk about this. I can explore it. You know what I mean? I can delve into it with other human beings because we're social creatures. And that's, once again, I truly feel like that's how disclosure works. So don't be afraid to reach out to people in the community, to talk, to tell your story if you need to, because it's needed. And we bounce off of one another. This is disclosure, guys. We're all disclosure. We all. Paul, your disclosure, Dan, your disclosure. You guys have experiences. I have experiences. The government, they're not gonna do it for us. We're gonna have to do it for ourselves. So, hang in there and reach out.
Yeah, I love that, Christian. And when we bottle them up and we're just on our own with those thoughts and don't share them, that's when I think it can become unhealthy. And to integrate these thoughts and experiences, we can only do that if we share them. So you've got 3 people here that are willing to listen on a space or on a private direct message. I know some people just only feel comfortable enough to just DM, and I've had several people do that with me, and I welcome that.
I love it. I agree, guys, totally with everything you're both saying. And it's always been personal disclosure. It's always been personal
Always.
disclosure, and it always probably will be. With that being said, Dr. Dan, thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining
guys.
us
Brother.
tonight. It was such a great conversation. I'd love to have you on again. Everybody in the chat, everybody that watched today, thank you so much again, my Portal peeps, and have a good night, everyone. Peace.